Hi, everybody. I would like to welcome a very special guest today to my channel, Daniel Trevor. He is the author. You can see behind him there, but I have the book too. He is the author of Unholy Trinity, How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted. I mean, that pretty much says it all right there. But I have a few questions for Daniel today, and I think you're going to really enjoy this chat that we're about to have. So welcome to my channel. I am so glad that you reached out to me and that we are having this conversation. I'm about halfway through your book, and I have learned a lot. And I've got all the books. I buy all the books that come out. I'm so impressed with all of the citations that you have, just everything about it.
Wow!
So we're gonna get into it, okay. But I want to paint a picture. You're welcome. I want to paint a picture here for my audience, and then I'm going to let you go. Talk. I mean, Your story is so unique. So. Here's someone, this is what I got from what I've read so far. You are someone who, on the surface, everything looked normal. You were a healthy guy. You looked fit. You exercised. You ate healthy as you understood it. You took supplements that your doctor recommended, and even your doctor thought, he's A-okay. What happened? What? Walk us through what happened and why.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, because I love getting this information out there. And I just love your channel too. In fact, I found you on my YouTube feed. I saw Dr. Rob Kiltz, and you, and I thought, hey, I got to watch that. See, who is this ketogenic woman, Anita, So, and that was really wonderful. I really loved it. So thank you for doing that. And what happened to me was everything you said so far is correct. Insofar as, I thought I was a Mr. Healthy. About 5 years ago, I had a heart attack and I almost died.
Yeah.
And like I said, I thought I was Mr. Healthy, and that wasn't supposed to happen to me, right? And so, having studied technical data throughout my life, I decided to take the dive into the medical science to find out, how the hell could this happen to me? I'm Mr. Healthy, right? And what I discovered absolutely blew my mind. It shocked and infuriated me, because, what I discovered is what we've been told to eat for 70 years or more is killing us. Mm. And, it's just, these corrupt people came along that had some corrupt science. Well, you probably know Ansel Keys and his crew.
Yes.
And he had this back in the 50s and 60s. He had this theory called the diet heart hypothesis. And he thought that it was the meat and the butter and the cheese, and it was clogging up the arteries. And it's not that way at all. And, what had happened was in 1955, President Eisenhower in the United States, he had a heart attack, and it was a big deal because a lot of people at the time were dropping like flies from heart disease. And in my chapter 1, I go into this because in the first couple of chapters, I like to kind of give the reader, an idea of how did we get here? How did we get to this position? And so I have a lot of graphs and charts and images and photos, and I like to make it easier for the reader. So they can see, and I have this one graph that shows from 1900 from your way, 1900s over here, 1955, when Eisenhower had his heart attack, was here. And heart disease and heart attacks were just going up like this from bottom left to top right. And so he came along and had this theory, and it was all wrong and that kind of thing. But what they found years later was that there's this thing that in the arteries. So years later, they discovered this process called electron microscopy, where they have these teeny tiny cameras that they can snake up into the arteries to see what's going on. That's what they use to put in stents and that kind of thing, right? And to do angiograms. And what they discovered was this thing called the glycoalix. What is that? The glycoalix is this hairy, fuzz-like lining of the artery walls, and it acts as the first line of defense against what's called small, dense, pattern B LDL particles. Now, these are the deadly ones. What they can do is they can invade the artery wall through a process called transcytosis. They get stuck in this place called the intima media space. I won't get too sciencey on you now. And they build up this plaque over time, these small, dense LDL particles. And what they discovered was smoking, which was an epidemic back then, destroys this protective glycoalix. And, people were smoking doctors were smoking around their patients. They smoked in planes and restaurants. And it was an epidemic.
I remember that.
You look at all the old movies, they're all lighting up everywhere, right? And so, that destroyed. And then this guy came up with this thing with the low fat, you got to go low fat, and that's what'll save the cholesterol and that whole crazy thing. And so what the big food companies, they started to remove a lot of the fats from the food. And when you do that, doesn't taste so good. So they added sugar and carbs and that kind of thing to make it more palatable. And that was within, 7 or 8 years they started doing that. And then, but what they discovered was there's a worse destroyer of the glycoalix, and that is the carbohydrates from refined grains and sugars. They destroy this glycoalix far more. So we've replaced the smoking that destroys it, with one that's worse. And so, that's the kind of thing. And I think of my book as 3 things. First of all, it's a how-to book on how I reversed 4 comorbidities, which I'll tell you about. And it's also an expose on big food, big pharma, and big medicine. And having said that, I'm sure there's beautiful, wonderful people in all 3 of those. But,
absolutely,
there's certain sections that are just, not in our favor insofar as looking out for us. And then it's also, I think of the book as a situation and data evaluation and analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We are now approaching 50% in under a mere 100 years.
No.
Never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so quickly. You got to say, what the hell is happening? And when you pull the strings and you do the analysis, it's the introduction of the carbs, the sugar, and the oils in the 20th century in the amounts and concentrations never before seen. I mean, we've had these things in our diet for a while. Sugar was invented in India, and it was even referenced in this religious text called the Atharva Veda, and that goes back to like 1500 BC. So it's been around, and also India is still right now the largest consumer of sugar. That's why they have a diabetes problem over there. And and then and then you have the grains. I mean, those were introduced a mere like 9,000, 10,000 years ago, right? Because we didn't have any of that. Our anthropologists and bioarchaeologists tell us that our diet always consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat, nose to tail, right? For at least 2.6 to 4.5 million years. I think it's longer, but I'll take that. If that's what they can prove, then I'll take that, So this whole idea of, eating carbohydrates and grains and sugars and everything is very new to these evolutionarily developed bodies. And I always come back to that. What did we do 3,000 years ago? Or when you and I were together 13,000 years ago, well, how did we eat and behave and that kind of thing? It's interesting. I was just at the gym yesterday, and I was talking to this guy at the gym after he got off the treadmill. And I said, do you enjoy that? He says, well, not especially, but it's one of these now I'm supposed to's of life, right?
Right.
Well, I said, if you think about it, how did we behave evolutionarily? Was there ever a reason or rationale for us to be running through the jungle or the forest for a half hour or an hour? No, we sprinted, when we were chasing
Yes.
after animals or being chased, right,
Yes.
by an enemy or an animal, that kind of thing. But there was never any reason for jogging. Now, I can understand how there's competition amongst men and the marathons and all that kind of thing. But if you really look into that too, marathon was this plateau or field in Greece. And I think this is like about 2,500 years ago. And there was this, I can't remember his name, but there was a big victory that they won. They beat the barbarians, and this guy ran for like, I don't know, almost 25 miles to announce the exciting victory that they just had. He announced the victory, the glorious victory, and then he passed out and died because he just did too much, And so we still have marathons and contests and races, and I can understand all that, but it's not something that we need on a regular basis. Again, when did we ever need to run through a forest for a half hour or 20 minutes or whatever it is? It just didn't happen. And so I always try to look back at, okay, so what did we do 3,000 years ago, or 13,000 years ago, or 130,000, and I try to match things up that way. I mean, I got challenged one time who was it? Dante Ferrigno. You know Dante?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good, he's got a really great YouTube channel. And I was on with him. Oh, first of all, it was like 2.5 hours. I thought I was on Joe Rogan. I was like, what? I enjoyed it because he had brought this other fellow in, his other partner. And he says, I don't know about these blueberries because I'll have an occasional blueberry, not a lot. And I said, well, look, if you and I were out hunting, I don't know, 2, 3, 5, 13,000 years ago, and we came across some berries that had just come back into season for a short time. Oh my God, we'd get so excited. We go tell Uncle Throgmagog, and he would tell the tribe, and we all go eat berries for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't think, we're carnivore. We're not allowed to. That's not on our diet. We didn't have those. I mean, we got to use our common sense, right? And, if I just put 3 or 4 ripe blueberries on my tongue and it's like I had a Hershey's bar. I mean, where I am now, it's like, wow, you know?
Your
and
taste
getting
buds
back
really
there,
change. Definitely.
Oh, it's just amazing. So it doesn't bother me. You got to use our common sense and be moderate. And also with regard to that, we didn't have like I said, we didn't have the grains and the sugars and all that. And then, the way we started the last century, the very first candy bar by Hershey's was 1900. I'm thinking, what a way to start a century, right? And then the seed oils are just so deadly. We didn't even, they weren't even invented until 1865. And so that's a whole other thing. But anyway, I just gave you a lot of mouthful and a long answer to your short question.
No, that's okay. I mean, because a lot of people are still clinging to those studies from that time, the 50s and 60s. They are still citing them and still, I don't know about you. I have a YouTube channel, so people leave comments, and some of those people that leave comments are still clinging to that old dogma about the cholesterol.
That's because they hear that from their doctors.
Yes.
I pay attention to the markets. I used to be a professional trader of gold and silver, precious mining companies, and the commodities, and I had to know about international monetary policy and all that kind of thing. And so sometimes when I get up, I'll turn on the markets, CNBC, that kind of thing, to see where things are and that kind of thing. And I saw an ad. It was from a big pharma company. And they're saying, well, I can't remember the exact wording, but now they want your LDL-C, your LDL, to be lower than 55. First, they wanted it lower than 130 years ago, and then they wanted it lower than 100, and then they wanted it lower than 70. Now they want it lower than 55. And guess what? We have just the right pill that you can buy You're your doctor, and we got a patent on it. So we're going to make a ton of money for you to get your LDL down to under 55. And it's like, oh my God. So they listen to their doctors because, they got a white jacket, knows all, sees all, right? But they don't get the education that you and I have insofar as the truth about cholesterol. It's just sad that way that, these people that are making those comments, they just don't get that information.
They don't.
They don't. And interestingly, about 2 years ago, I moved, and I wanted to get an echocardiogram because I like to once a year keep an eye on my what's called ejection fraction. What that is where the heart has to push out the blood to the rest of the body at a certain velocity or force. And it's got to get everywhere. It's got to get to your organs, got to get to your brain, got to get to your feet. And the normal is between 50 and 65. When you drop below 50, you're in stage 1 heart failure. Below 40, stage 2. And by the time you get to stage 4, you're usually in hospice. So I always like to, because once you have a heart attack, you have permanent damage to your heart. Yeah. Nobody knows. I mean, I was discussing this with Dr. Philip Ovadia when I was on with him. Dr. Philip.
Yeah, I do.
He's a cardiac surgeon. He's done over 3,200 heart surgeries. So he really knows. Also carnivore. And, I was discussing with nobody knows how much damage there is. There's no way to measure how many months or years it might shave off the end of your lifespan. Yeah. That's not that. So what did so when I had the heart attack, I found that out in my research. I thought, well, what can I have control over? And I thought, well, I'm going to get into the most superior metabolic health as I can possibly achieve with this current meat body that I have. Right. And so, I did that, and that's what I can have control over. And so my point is I went in to see this cardiologist because I didn't know him before. And I didn't want to get into a lot of discussion with him. I just said, hey, listen, I'd like to get this echocardiogram and I need a prescription, that kind of thing. And my blood labs, I just had them done. They look great because I know how to read all my labs, right? So the first question he asked me, he said, so how's your LDL? Now, I didn't roll my eyes, even though I wanted to. It was like,
right.
I said, well, I thought, well, am I going to get into it with this guy or what? Because he's got this practice with partners and, all that kind of thing. And I said, well, my LDL is out the roof. It's probably 270, something like that. But I'm in superior metabolic health. My HDL is 96. My triglycerides are 38. I mean, I'm just sparkling clean, and I'm what you call a lean mass hyperresponder, according to the latest science from scientists like Dave Feldman and so forth. And he's looking at me like I'm from outer space. He doesn't know what to make of it. Like I have two heads. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. And so I just, I didn't press him on it. I didn't want to get into the whole fake data that he subscribes to and tells all his patients. And by the way, he had belly out here. So I'm thinking, oh my God, what kind of advice is this cardiologist giving to his patients with this belly? So anyway, I don't know why it reminded myself of that, but doctors just don't get this information. They're still believing in the high cholesterol. But here's the deal. People with high cholesterol live the longest. People with low cholesterol die much earlier and usually of some form of cancer. I mean, it's just all backwards. Anyway.
It is. Let's circle back, though, to when you almost died. In the days following, what was it that you discovered about because you, on the surface, were healthy. What did you find out about yourself?
Well, after that happened, I went to Google University and YouTube University and PubMed and all these places and the books, and I immersed myself in all the studies and that kind of thing. And I found these geniuses on the cutting edge of modern medical science and nutrition. And I started to learn all this new information. I'm thinking, what? Are you kidding me? And I started looking into it, doing the studies. And it just really shocked and just infuriated me, like I said. And so I discovered all of these things. And here's the thing. Getting into my 4 comorbidities. Well, first of all, I knew I had heart disease, right? But I didn't know it because there's no symptoms.
Right.
Check out this stat. There's so many people that when they have a first heart attack, they die. Over 60% of the people who die from a deadly first heart attack, their very first symptom of having heart disease is their own death. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? It's just, there's no signs, there's no symptoms. That's why I encourage people to get testing. They got to know what's going on. If they don't get testing, then, it's like driving down the road without a speedometer or a steering wheel, and you will crash into something. You got to know what your numbers are. And so anyway, I got all these tests. I saw this guy. There was this one fellow named Dr. Ford Brewer, and he had this YouTube channel, and he had this, the video was something like how to reverse 20 years of arterial plaque like I did. And I thought, well, I need to watch this one, right? And he goes through what a heart attack is and everything. So I started following him, and he had a book. His book was Prevention Myths, Why Stress Tests Can't Predict Your Heart Attack and Which Tests Actually Do. I thought, wow, I got to get this one. So the more I got to know him, the more I found out that he had taught thousands of doctors over 30 years at Johns Hopkins, and he was brilliant at all the testing. So after I had developed, doing all this research, writing the book, because I had been chronicling all of the things that I discovered, I reached out to him and I said, I'm writing this book. And I'm sure he probably rolled his eyes. Oh, writing a book. Yeah, right. Okay. So I had to send him something. I said, look, would you write a chapter in my book delineating what are the most important blood labs and scans that anybody can get online without needing a doctor's prescription? That way you yourself can find out if you've got something that you need to handle and pay attention to, or you're just fine. And so he did that. That's my chapter 22. And he calls it Don't Guess, Test. So because he looks at it like that, because there's no symptoms. And so what turns out in my case, and in a lot of people with, everybody with heart disease, I was a raging type 2 diabetic and I didn't know it. And the reason for that is I'm one of the 1% of the population that can be on the slim side and still be a raging type 2 diabetic.
Yeah.
And because most people, once you get overweight, you're there. Right. And that's the first sign of that. And so because what doctors do, most doctors, they'll test fasting blood glucose and A1C. And even the American Diabetes Association will say, hey, if you just do those two, you're going to miss a lot of people. What they don't do is this test called the OGTT with insulin. This goes back to Dr. Kraft from the 70s, who had a book called The Diabetes Epidemic and You. And he was the one that discovered, and was verified and confirmed years later, that you can't have heart disease without having some degree of diabetic physiology. That's where it all starts. In fact, once you have prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, that opens the door to, because you've got inflammation and that goes through the body, through the arteries and that kind of thing. And that's why having insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, that's just a fancy sounding word for hypers, too much insulin. Emia means in the blood. Hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood. And that comes from too many carbs, sugars, and oils, right? And so, they don't do this test called the OGTT, oral glucose tolerance test. And doctors don't order it. They just they'll do the A1C and the fasting blood glucose. Oh, you're good. I'll see you in a year. No. That's the first one you want to get to find out, wow, how diabetic am I, if I am at all? So, and there was another study, and this is out of Johns Hopkins. This is just a few years ago, which is very current in the medical community because, oh my God, it takes so long for new science to get down to the front lines of the doctors, let alone how long it takes to get into the medical schools. And there was a study out of Johns Hopkins that found that it was a big survey they did, and they found that 74% of doctors, now we're talking about family physicians, general practitioners, internists, and cardiologists who they surveyed. 74% of them do not know how to test and diagnose prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And I'm thinking, what? Are you kidding me? That's our biggest epidemic. Because once you're there, that's the source root cause of cardiovascular disease, your heart attacks, your strokes, certain cancers, peripheral neuropathy, which leads to amputations, cataracts, blindness. That's why I call prediabetes and type 2 diabetes the gateway disease. Because once you're there, that way it opens up to all these other things and there's no symptoms. I mean, by the time you have symptoms, you are way down the line and it's a long road back, or it's just too late.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said all that because, I mean, we all know about heart disease and we all know that there's type 2 diabetes, but it was reading your book. That's the first time I ever learned how closely connected they are. I was a little bit blown away by that, as a matter of fact. Like, I think that's amazing. So thank you for explaining all of that.
So the people that do know that they have heart disease, they got to do this OGTT to find out how diabetic they are. Yeah. I think his quote was something, and I have it in chapter 2, Dr. Kraft's, because he's the father of the insulin survey and because he had done thousands of autopsies, and he discovered that the process of heart disease or the process of diabetes is atherosclerotic. It's in the arteries, is his first expression. And, he discovered all that. And I think his quote was something like, those with heart disease not associated with diabetes are simply undiagnosed. And he just proved it with all his data. So anyway, I'm glad you like that. A lot of people say that they didn't know that too. So, well, that's what I'm trying to. Yeah. So that was my source root cause of my cardiovascular disease. And then I find out that I have this thing called NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Because I don't drink, no drugs. How could I have this? And so what I had was, and this is another one that the doctors don't check. It's a liver. I had this elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. And that is a liver enzyme. Doctors, if they check any, they'll check ALT, ASP, ALT. And they don't check the GGT for some reason. And that is just so vitally important. And I covered this on Ken Burry's channel. See, what happened was the life insurance companies, they have to know who to accept, who to reject, right? And they are damn good at analyzing data and statistics and all that, right? That's why they've been the most successful companies on the planet since like the 1600s, I think. And what they discovered is they have these mortality predictor lists, right? Total cholesterol is not even there. Neither is LDL, but their number one predictor of all-cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. Sometimes I'm thinking, why don't the doctors in the medical community know what the life insurance companies have discovered? Can you guys talk to each other? And because that's how important it is. And then the more I looked into it, more studies I looked at, if you have this elevated GGT for a protracted length of time, the usual cause of death is a heart attack. I was right there. And so, and that was from the high fructose corn syrup I was HFCS, because, I didn't know any of this. I was just like the average person who thinks, when you go into the supermarket, well, it's like, if it was that bad for me, it wouldn't be for sale, right? Because attorneys would get involved. And so, it's like, but it's not that way at all. The attorneys will, because if something kills you quickly, then they get involved. But if something kills you over decades, it's a little different. So anyway, I was just the average person, and I would start my day with a heart healthy, quote unquote, whole grain granola that had to
Yeah.
have 60 or 70 grams of carbohydrates in it and some high fructose corn syrup and that kind of thing. So again, I was like most people and I didn't know a lot of this information. And so I had to take the deep dive, and I'm glad I had that technical background to be able to absorb it all and then be able to write it. Because I wrote the book in a way like for my Uncle Joe or my brother Dave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're smart people, but it's written for the average reader of health and wellness. It's not written for doctors and scientists, even though they need it more than anybody because they actually treat people, right? Because their mind is full of all this other stuff from big food, big pharma, and some other corrupt areas, and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to write it for the average reader so that they can. I always like what Einstein said. He says, if you can't explain something complicated to a third grader, then you don't really understand it yourself. You have to be able to give examples or analogies or this or that, or break it down in a way so that they understand it.
Well, having read partway through it, I can definitely back up what you're saying, because I found it incredibly easy to understand, and there was concepts and ideas that I was like, oh, that's what that is, and I had a lot of. I'm not even finished, and I had a lot of aha moments because you do have a way of explaining it. Someone non-technical, non-sciencey, can understand. So I appreciate it for that reason, and I highly recommend it for people who don't like, all of the real hardcore science stuff but want to understand it. I think it's great.
Right. Well, if I have to use a technical term, I'll explain what it is in real simple ways. Not, you don't have to grab a dictionary or anything. If I say the word endothelium, in parentheses, right after, I'll put lining of the arteries.
Yeah.
And after I've done that a few times, then the person goes, oh, endothelia, that's the lining of the arteries. So that way they know what I'm talking about there. So that's a simple example. But, I learned how to study well early on, but because I'm just a lower class street kid from Philly, and I shouldn't have to know any of this stuff, right? So that's why I'm a little rough around the edges, but so try not to hold it against me. But it's just that there's so much corruption. Mm-hmm. I mean, going back to the big tobacco companies that were just making so much money from all of that. In the 1980s, smoking was going down. I mean, the people were listening to the Inspector General, I think it was, of the United States. They were saying, hey, smoking's bad for you. And smoking was going down, statistics and their income. And so the big big tobacco companies, they recognized that. And they started buying up the big food companies. They bought General Mills and Kraft and Nabisco and these other. And they brought their addiction scientists from big tobacco over to big food companies. And when I say addiction scientists, I'm not talking about how to get unaddicted, but how do you get to get them to eat the whole package instead of half the package?
Your repeat customers.
Yes, I know. When you go down the aisles, your opiate receptors, what they try to come up with these ingredients that stimulate the opiate receptors of the brain so that you crave more of these things. And when you walk down the aisle, got to get 2 bags of that because Uncle Joe likes that. And, you get 3 bags of this, and you got to have your Lucky Charms and everything else. Right. So, anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. The big tobacco was just, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about being, keto or carnivore. You just go around the store, the perimeter, grab a few veggies if you need to, a little bit of fruit, and get all the meat and eggs. Don't even go down those ails.
That's right.
I think that's the way to go.
You have so many wonderful tips on your channel too. It's like, your videos about your, what you do, and because you're such a great cook, right?
Thank you.
Chef, cook. Yeah.
But when you think about your grandparents, like my grandparents, I'm in my late 60s, so my grandparents are gone now. But when I think about how they ate and how they lived their lives, that it's so different than my parents who, were in the 50s and 60s listening to all these doctors saying, throw out the butter, get the mazola oil, get the canola oil.
God.
My grandparents, we used to go there every summer, and everything on the table was they either grew it or they butchered it in their backyard. I mean, I witnessed, the chickens' heads being cut off and them running around and, having to participate in plucking the feathers out and all that kind of stuff. But everything was what they did with their own hands. And they walked places, they rode bikes, you only took the car if you had to. It's so different than, the baby, well, I'm a baby boomer, but it's so different than my parents who did the cars, did the convenience foods, did the mazola oil, because my mom went to her grave thinking I was going to die because I would only eat butter and not margarine or mazola oil, It's a shame. It really is a shame.
It's just, it's marketing, it's big money, it's big food. Mm-hmm. They see, the guys in the white jackets are saying this, and they get it wrong. So let's make our foods like that. Let's have, what is it called? I can't believe it's not butter. It's like, what? That's going to get you in trouble faster than eating the butter. Actually, the butter won't. Because, these seed oils, I have a whole chapter on that. It's called The Shocking Truth About Vegetable Oils.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to get a few graphs and charts and a couple of quotes from Nina Teicholz, who wrote this amazing book called The Big Fat Surprise.
I love that book.
Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Dr. Chris Kenobi and Dr. Kate Shanahan, because they're at the forefront of exposing the whole, wheat.
The seed oils,
The seed oils, it's just the whole history of, they didn't even exist. These two guys, they first came about in 1865 through cotton farming. They had this cottonseed oil, and then it developed from there. And it was used in the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s and early 1900s as machinery lubricant. And these two guys from Europe came over, William Procter and James Gamble, Procter & Gamble, of course, and they looked at a bucket of it and they said, hey, it looks like lard, like what people cook with, right? Why don't we sell it and we can make some money? 1911, Crisco started flying off the shelves, and oh my God, it was just, and then they found out years later, not until the 90s, that Crisco has more trans fats in it than any other kind of food that you can eat. And trans fats are the most harmful fats that you can put in your body. It's like, what?
I know.
It's so insane. And, but that's all the information that people got. They weren't scientists. They didn't question things. And they said, well, he's got a white jacket, so he must know.
Yeah, or if the government told them or the doctor told them, it had to be true. It had to be true.
It's such a shame. So that's why I wanted to expose some of that in the book. And I have, because these seed oils, they have, when you cook with them, and they have these chemicals that come about that are, TBHQ and HNE, which is 4-hydroxynonenal. And then there's aldehydes like you have in cigarettes. There's and hexane. It goes from a long way from being a vegetable over to where it's this machinery lubricant that we're putting on ourselves. And these ingredients and these chemicals are carcinogenic, neurodegenerative, and they're 7 to 10 times more likely to cause inflammation and heart disease. So you got to stay away.
I understand that they stay in your body for a long time. Like the seed oils, they have some kind of a long half-life.
It's like 2 years, I think it is. I forget the exact stats on that, but I've got,
so if you
my
quit
head is so filled with.
if you quit seed oils today, some of it's going to be in your body 2 years from now still.
Well, yeah, you have to. Well, it's good to stop today, but you don't want to keep adding it in there to push that time out there because it's just,
Exactly.
it's kind of like one of the examples I give in that chapter is that it's kind of like when people use street drugs like pot, LSD, cocaine, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Some of that stores up in the fatty tissues of the body, just like the seed oils, right? And that's why in the future, people, even after they get off of the drugs, they can still have, trips, so to speak, or they feel stupid or lethargic or whatever. And because that's still in their fat tissues of the body. And it takes so long for it to go through. So you want to stay away from the street drugs and you want to stay away from the vegetable seed oils. Now, there are a couple of that are not so bad. Authentic olive oil is good. And when I say authentic, because what they do is they found that there's a lot of corruption in that area where, let's say you go for the less expensive extra virgin olive oil. It's been, they'll put 20% true authentic olive oil and the rest of it they'll fill with some cheap, really health damaging oil like soybean oil, safflower, sunflower. There's Kate Shanahan calls them the hateful eight. I can't remember all of them. So I have so much data in my.
They don't have to disclose that on the label.
That's why I'm saying it's corruption. That's why you have to. You can do a Google search. There's a gal that has a website. I can't remember her name. How to tell if you're which olive oils are authentic and which ones are you want to stay away from.
Okay.
Don't go for the price. You want to get if it's an expensive one from Italy or something, then that's probably a good sign that you're on the right path. But I have all that information in that chapter too. But
okay,
anyway,
or you just stick to animal fats, tallow and that kind of thing, like butter.
Sure. Yeah. I was asking Dr. Chris Kenobi when I talked to him. I said, "What do you use when you have that? Let's say if you have a salad once in a while. Doesn't need a lot of salads. I don't do that either. But he says, I'll just melt butter, put butter over it instead of the seed oils because he wants to stay away from all of them. But anyway, you just got to be careful.
Yeah. So speaking of seed oils, and I think they are known to cause some inflammation. The word chronic inflammation gets thrown around a lot, but a lot of people don't really know what that is. It seems to be one of those vague terms. I've had people ask me, well, how do you know that you have inflammation? Like, how can you tell? Do you feel like people don't understand the gravity of the problem with chronic inflammation?
Absolutely. It's another thing I try to get across. I said, look, you have to test. There are up on my website, danieltrevor.com. At the top, it'll say blood tests. You can go there. You can order them there. You can just use it as a guide. Take to your doctor. Hey, doc, I want to get this test. And be careful when you go to your doctor and you hear, hey, I was on Anita, the Ketogenic Woman channel, and I heard about this test. Can you get this for me? And he might say, oh, you don't need that. You're fine. You don't need that. You're fine. The only reason he's saying that is because he doesn't know what it is, wouldn't know how to interpret the results anyway. So you have to get these tests. You can get them on your own. There's these online labs. See, I made a deal with Quest Diagnostics, which in the United States, there's thousands of locations. I think in Canada too. And, you order it there, like this OGTT that I told you about. I don't know, it's like $60. You can buy it today, have it done in the lab nearest you, put in your zip code. Oh, I'm going to get it and find out tomorrow to what degree you're diabetic or not. So anyway, there are these, I call them smoke detectors. There are blood tests. I mean, you can tell if you've got inflammation with these certain blood tests. There's what's called myeloperoxidase, LP-Plaque2, MACR, microalbumin creatinine ratio. Again, I don't want to get too sciencey, but it's all up on the website. Check those, buy those, whether you go directly to Quest or through my website or wherever you want. Just get them and find out if you're on fire, right? Yeah. If your artery's on fire, because most people, their arteries have been on fire and inflamed for years. And they need to resort to a more ancestral way of eating, which is which is low carb, keto, ketovore, carnivore, and lion diet, right?
Yeah, the proper human diet, basically.
Yeah, that's what Dr.
As
King
Dr.
calls it,
Berry,
right?
he likes to say that,
exactly.
and I think it's a great description, because it's a spectrum, and there are some people that can tolerate the veggies, and then there's those people with autoimmunes that just need to eat the ruminant meats, and it doesn't really matter where you are, as long it's more about what you're not having, which, as you say, is the seed oils and the grains and the sugars and all that.
Yeah. Oh my God, I should tell you a little bit about the grains. This part, I mean, there's so much of the research that I did in this book. It's still blowing my mind, right? I have this chapter called, it's all about wheat and grains. It's, Are You a Wheat Addict? And like I said, I have a lot of pictures and graphs and images and that kind of thing. And I have a picture of a guy who's 100,000 years old. Well, it's his skull. He's got perfect teeth. And I asked the reader, I said, do you think he had an orthodontist or flossed 3 times a day? No, right? And then when they started exhuming bodies from after 9 or 10,000 years ago, when they started having wheat and grains, they started noticing all these new diseases were coming in, not as bad as the last 100 years or so. Missing teeth, bone diameter and length shrunk. Men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. It was just a total disaster from eating these wheat and grains. You see, anthropologists and bioarchaeologists discovered that clever humans they discovered that if they ground up the seeds from these wheat and grains, they saw the ruminant animals eating, they could make, and they added some water, maybe, heated it up a little bit. They made something like a porridge or something like that. Right. And that way it allowed them to survive an extra day, an extra week, an extra month. This is when, their hunting was, it was just hard. There weren't any animals, depending on the climate, whatever. And, but again, doing that, they took a serious toll. And so, and then I find out that wheat raises the blood sugar higher than a Snickers bar. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? And I had no idea. And then Big Ag came along in the late 60s, early 70s, and they had this process called chemical mutagenesis and radiation mutagenesis. And what that does is it amps up this protein in gluten called gliadin, Gliadin, gliadin. What does that do? It attaches to the opiate receptors of the brain. And the same opiate receptors as heroin and morphine. I mean, it doesn't get you high or relieve pain, but its expression is to make you crave more of the things that have wheat and grains in them, like the bread, pasta, cereal, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, tortillas, pizza crust, and on and on. And that's because we never had them. They weren't in our diet prior to 9 or 10,000 years ago. That's when they started having what they call agricultural societies or tribes, where they went from hunter-gatherers to a more agriculture where they grew their own animals, the chickens and the goats and they grew the grains and that kind of thing. So anyway, it's another whole thing that blew my mind. That is another whole
thing. And have you maybe talked to Dr. William Davis, the wheat belly doctor?
No,
you should reach out to him and talk to him.
No, his books were one of the books that I got. Were several books of his that I got, and I stole some of his research because he has the same citations in there. And I thought, well, wow, this says that. I'm adding that too because it's not getting it out there enough. And you need to get this out. Maybe he says it a different way than I do, and people listen to it. I was just on with one of your colleagues, Dr. Anthony Chafee, and he was saying the same thing. He says, I was going to give this up because everybody's already said it, Sean Baker and this one and that one. But he said that people told him that he would explain it in a certain way, or they just needed to hear it another time, because the number of times you hear something, the more it gets embedded in somebody's psyche. And they can understand
100%.
As long as they can understand it and it makes sense. because the whole idea of eating in an evolutionarily consistent fashion is what these bodies are used to.
That's right.
For a very long time. When you have a certain, there's this thing called, I was discussing this with Dr. Ken when I was on with him, species adaptation hypothesis. And that says that basically that when a certain species is used to eating a certain way for a very long time, or as Dr. Ken said, a long damn time,
yeah,
that becomes their healthy diet. And so, we've been
species
eating,
appropriate.
There you go.
Yeah. So my audience is predominantly, I would say about 80% women, and they're around my age and older. Do you have any special messages for that segment of the population, what they should be looking at as far as maybe which blood test would be important to them, what changes they should make?
I have several ideas. The first one that pops into my head is I have chapter 13 is on it's called osteopenia, osteoporosis, and other bone issues. And what they're discovering is, in fact, the first study that I cover in that chapter is that these bone issues, they're descending into lower and lower ages. The study, they looked at 35 to 50-year-olds, and they're finding the osteopenia and osteoporosis in those ages because of the onslaught of the unholy trinity, the big food. It's pushing on they're eating this thing, and it's destroying the bones and so forth. But it affects women more than it affects men. I think the stat is something like 2 out of 5 men will have an osteoporotic fracture at some point. For women, I think it's 4 out of 5.
Oh,
I even say, sorry, ladies. I forget what but it's much more for the women than the men. And so you have to pay attention to this area. So I even say, hey, listen, you 30, 40, and 50-year-olds, you got to start paying attention to this area now because usually you don't start seeing it until the 50s, 60s, and beyond, right?
Yeah.
So there are certain nutrients that you can take that they've done studies on that there's this thing called BMD, bone mineral density. And throughout life, there's this thing called, what is it called? There's this process where you have what's called osteoclasts with a C and osteoblasts with a B. And as an analogy is where, let's say you're remodeling your kitchen. You got to cut out some things. That's the osteoclast. And then you got to build up some things. That's the osteoblast. That's just the building up. And this is a balanced process that goes on through life. There's always a cutting out of old bone and restoring of the new. So it's the osteoclast cutting old bone and cutting it out, and the osteoblast building up. What happens is at a certain age, the osteoclasts continue to do their favorite thing, which is the cutting, but the osteoblasts, they want to take an early retirement, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to get a DEXA scan, DEXA. And it's a simple, you lie on this open, it's a low radiation open X-ray. It takes like 5 minutes. And they analyze, your bone mineral density and that kind of thing to see where you are. And you want to get one of those. And if you have to pay for it, I think it's like $100. I don't know. And so that way, that's one test that they want to take. And also, the heart disease. I think I cover this, and I go deep into the cardiovascular disease in chapter 17, 18, 19, and 20. Again, I still explain it well, but I want to give the basics first of how we got here through the carbs, the sugar, and oils, and all that. And so what they found is that cardiovascular disease is most people mistakenly think from some old study from God knows when that men have trouble with heart disease more than women, but it turns out it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So you have to get these blood markers to find out where you are as a woman, especially if you're under 60 or right in that age. You have to get these things because what will happen is you're feeling weird and you go to the hospital and they'll send you home. They're finding more women are being sent home They wind up back in there after having had a heart attack, and they didn't detect it. I don't know why that is, but anyway, so you really have to pay attention to these certain tests. And I really get into that in especially chapter 19. After you've had chapter 17, which gets into the whole, I should probably tell you about this. I mean, we were talking about corruption earlier, right? Mm-hmm. In big food, big pharma, but also in big medicine. There was this big study called the ischemia trial. It was a large $100 million government-funded trial, and they had 5,179 patients, and they divided them into two groups. One group got invasive procedures. They either got CABG, which is CABG, coronary artery bypass graft, that's like open heart surgery, or PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, and that's where you get one or more stents. So there was an interventional group where they did these invasive procedures. The other group, they sent them in the direction of lifestyle. Drop 40 pounds, get back to the gym, stop eating the Fritos and the Lucky Charms and all that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they followed them closely for 4 years. And at the end of the 4 years, they found no difference in outcomes, zero difference. And they even wrote, this researcher said, the ischemia trial failed to show that these invasive procedures were any good at preventing heart attacks and strokes. So what? And this study rocked the cardiology community. And then came the Orbita trial and the Courage trial, other big, expensive studies. It was the same failures. And so I asked the reader in her book, I said, you think after all of these failures, you think that the statistics on the amount of these invasive procedures will start to at least slow down, if not go down? The chart's like this.
Wow.
Now, to be clear, they are valuable as an intervention in emergency situation. If the person's having a heart attack or there's some emergency going on in the hospital, but that's only 15% of the time. The other 85% of the time, these invasive procedures are done to prevent. They're like, you're not even having any kind of symptoms or anything. They're done for prevention. And these studies showed that they don't work for that. And so even as I say to the reader, I say, listen, if your doctor is recommending that you do one of these invasive procedures, whether it's a stent or whatever, show him this study. Then he'll know that you know. And then you could say, explain to me again why you think I should have this. It's like, oh my God, so you got to do the study, read that chapter, 17, 18, 19, and 20, because it's really valuable information that you really need to know. And you'll know way more than most cardiologists do now, because a lot of it is brand new science just from the last 2 or 3 years.
Wow, and that's great.
See, it takes so long for new science to get down to the front lines of the doctors.
I know.
2 or 3 years ago was like 20 minutes ago in the medical community. So anyway, if you've got heart disease in your family, you need those few chapters. And I'm not selling anything. Listen, you don't make much money. I've discovered that, having been an entrepreneur all my life, you don't make much money selling health and wellness books, even though it's now an international bestseller, and I'm happy. But what I've become wealthy in my heart because I'm hearing from people all over the world that are like, wow, this is great. I know about the low carb, and the food companies you're doing. What?
It's really great. Reward. It's such great information that everybody needs to know. And I understand that you link to about 1,200 studies.
I'm proud to say that my book has more scientific citations and references than any other health and wellness book in existence. I mean, most of them, if they have any, they'll have 200 or 300, which is good because you know that whoever's writing it has the backup from the science. And I knew there were going to be people who go, "Oh, he's not a doctor. He's not a scientist." I say, "Look, why the hell should I trust you?" They're saying, right? And so I say, look, don't trust me. Just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness, and fix yourself. I did. You can too.
Well, and in fact, you have so many studies that that you've cited that you have a separate web page where you've got them all listed. So otherwise, the book would have been another 100 pages. Is how
Exactly. Yeah, we couldn't fit them in the book. The book would have been another 100 some pages, and then it would have made it heavier and more expensive, and all the natural resources used. I thought, let's just throw them up on the website. But people like that, because I tell you what I did, because besides having all of the information of a citation, just so your audience knows, you have to provide the authors, name of the study, the date, where it was published. But what I did was, since I was putting it up on the website, I added a hyperlink. That way you could just click on it and you can go directly to the study and see for yourself.
Wonderful. There you go.
None of this is Daniel's opinion, right? So again, it's danieltrevor.com. At the top, it'll say references. You click there and you could download all of them.
Okay,
and also while you're there, I offer a free preview of the book, which is a PDF of the first 48 pages. Because I'm a big believer in, look, taste a little bit. If you like it, then you can go buy it. So they can sign up, get on the mailing list, because once a week I'll send out a email blast of something important that I think is important to look at, and that kind of thing. They get, they sign up and they get that free PDF of the first 48 pages.
And I'm on your mailing list now, and I got your last email, and there was some really interesting stuff in there about fasting, and I learned some things, and even used it in one of my last live streams, because I've been playing around with intermittent fasting, and I did my first 42-hour fast last weekend, and I did another one this weekend.
Oh, wow.
There was you quoted something from that guy who won a Nobel. Did he win a Nobel Prize?
Dr. Lou Ignarro. Dr. Lou nitric oxide.
Yes. So
he discovered nitric oxide. So
Okay. Yeah. No. So your email was quite interesting and detailed, and so I was happy to get that. Where else can people find you? Are you basically are you on Instagram or anything like that?
I am so behind in all that. I am just like, I am. Look, I was telling my daughters the other day, I say, God, I must have been 60 years old when I first had my first smartphone. It's like, I missed all of that, and they're growing up with it. And I like the long form of the YouTube and showing up on talking to people like you, that we have like-minded endeavors and that kind of thing. And so I like getting on and talking at length to, I've been on with Sean Baker and Ken Berry and Dr. Philip Ovadia and Rob Kiltz and, Jesse Chapis and, and all of those I have up on my website too, in case. And the one that I just did a week ago or so was from, Dr. Anthony Chafee.
Yes.
That was a really good one. I really enjoyed that.
Yes, it was. I caught most of that one too.
Oh, wow.
So,
that was fun. That guy really knows a lot.
He does. He does. I'm pretty lame on social media too. You won't find me on TikTok. That kind of thing. I'll try not
to hold it against you.
I think it's for another generation. I don't know. So I think we are probably near the end. I usually keep these things at about an hour when I publish them. But do you want to say, is there anything in closing that you would like to say at all? Anything that you can think of?
Well, anyway, just don't be afraid of going low carb, keto, ketovore, carnivore, lion diet. Whatever suits you and fits in with your lifestyle and what agrees with your current body that you have. And by the way, I had a big misunderstood on whenever I heard the word carnivore, I thought, they only eat meat. And then I found out, I was on with Judy Cho, and she was explaining to me, no, that's the lion diet if you just eat meat. So there's carnivore is just you eat animal products, whether it's eggs, beef, butters, salmon, that kind of thing. And lion diet is only eating meat, because lions, they don't eat eggs or salmon, right?
Yeah, so that's just ruminant. Lion diet is ruminant meat only, water,
Yeah.
and that's it. That's
Yeah.
that's your choices.
Well, I'm not there. I'm at carnivore. I just, that kind of thing. And I'll do intermittent fasting, usually 18 hours a day. And I get in my workout before that. I try to work out every other day, but my whole routine is in chapter 14 because people are always asking me, Daniel, what is it you do exactly?
Yeah.
So I wrote a whole chapter. Okay, this is what I do and this is what I did there and that kind of thing. But yeah, I just encourage go low carb because it's ancestrally correct and consistent with how we've always eaten for millions of years. And that's where you will have a resurrection of your health and wellness, and you'll drop weight if that's something you need to do. You'll get healthy. Your heart disease will go in another direction, and you'll stop your non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and all that. So anyway, but all I can say is thank you, Anita. I really appreciate you having me because, again, I like getting the word out on this. And if I can help somebody, inspire them to take your path and what you're doing and subscribe to your channel, then, I think that I've done a good deed.
Well, thank you for agreeing to come here and talk to me. We will have all your links below, your website, to your many studies that as well, and for your book. So I really appreciate you being here, and just good luck. I mean, I can't believe the number of people that endorsed your book, and when I was reading through the endorsements, I mean, that is amazing. I
was blown away by that. I got some of those, like the Nina Teicholz and the Nobel Prize winner and Mark Hyman and all these names. I mean, I didn't really know that I had something valuable when I wrote it. I thought, well, let me try to get these people on board. And when they started writing these, I was like, what? Then I thought, well, I think I have something worthwhile here.
Do. And I really look forward to finishing the book. It's really a great book, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's watching or listening to check it out.
Thank you, Anita. Big hugs. Thank you so much.
All
I really
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it next year.
Okay. We'll do a follow-up.